Thanks for tuning in to Curious Cat, the podcast that examines a shadowy space where science and the supernatural collide. I'm your host, Jennifer Holtz. Join me every week as I explore what it means to be a soul in a meat suit. Welcome to Curious Cat. This episode began after an actor that was rumored for decades to be dead actually died. I thought it was a lighthearted way to touch death and feel more alive than ever, a sort of auditory memento mori. But after outlining the stories, it can also serve as a cautionary tale. Leave instructions pinned to your shirt or tucked into your wallet by your ID to have a coroner check for your pulse, then check again and again. Ask that your family grin and bears it if they're asked to identify your remains. It may just be someone that looks like you and works at the same car wash. And if someone publishes your obit before your death day, okay, have a laugh and host a living wake at your local tavern. Let's get into it. First up, the Fakers. Reader's Digest had a great rundown of 13 people who faked their own deaths. Lauren Kahn writes, on May 18th, 1926, Canadian-born evangelist Amy Semple McPherson disappeared while swimming at an LA beach. As rescue teams searched for her, one team member died, and a grief-struck follower of the charismatic religious leader drowned herself in despair. 5 weeks passed, and McPherson turned up in Mexico, claiming to have gone off the grid in the course of fleeing would-be kidnappers. The kidnapping story seemed shady and was investigated as a possible fraud. However, it remained unsolved until McPherson's actual death in 1944. In September 1930, Aleister Crowley, a self-proclaimed prophet and founder of his own religion, jumped off a cliff near Lisbon, Portugal, or so he made it seem. 3 weeks later, he turned up alive and well in Berlin. Turns out it was all an elaborate hoax that he'd planned with an acquaintance, the poet Fernando Pessoa. His motives remain unclear, but it's possible he did it to get away from a woman with whom he'd been traveling and with whom he'd grown bored. I think there's easier ways to break up than that. Is it any wonder Crowley's been called the wickedest man in the world? By the way, he staged his own death twice. Some say this was a ritual to propel him to the Masonic Order's famous 33rd level. When World War II ended in Europe, British spy Juan Pujol Garcia, with the help of his spy handlers, faked his own death by malaria in order to keep a surreptitious eye on Germany. His wife never believed it and wasn't surprised when he turned up 4 decades later, having been outed by an investigative reporter, Nigel West. Garcia was nicknamed Agent Garbo because of his esteemed acting skills and is one of Europe's most celebrated spies to this day. When the Reverend Philip St. John Wilson Ross, an English vicar, drowned during a seaside holiday in August 1955, his wife and congregation mourned his tragic death until 2 years later when he was spotted in Switzerland with another woman, Kathleen Ryle. He had faked his death and was living with Miss Ryle under the assumed names Mr. and Mrs. Davies. Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan, was a relative by marriage to Diana, Prince of Wales. Lord Lucan, as he was commonly known, disappeared in November 1974, following the murder of his children's nanny and the assault of his wife, who immediately identified the attacker as Lucan. His abandoned car was eventually recovered with an empty bottle of prescription pills inside, making it seem as if Lucan had killed himself, but it's been widely rumored that Lucan faked his death with the assistance of his wealthy and connected friends. British politician and Member of Parliament John Stonehouse drowned in Florida in 1974, conveniently, it seems, since he was heavily in debt. 2 months later, he was discovered in Australia, where he was living under an assumed name. At first, it was suspected he was Lord Lucan because Lucan had disappeared earlier that year. In 1976, Stonehouse was convicted of fraud and related offenses and served 3 years before being released on parole. In 1995, Takashi Mori, a 47-year-old Japanese man living in the Philippines, faked his death with the help of his 21-year-old son so that his family could collect on his life insurance policy, which was worth at least $5 million. Then they hurried off to Japan to live on their ill-gotten gains. 9 months after his quote-unquote death, Mori was discovered to be living in Manila. He was arrested for insurance fraud, along with his son and wife who were deported from Japan. Patrick McDermott was the boyfriend of actress and singer Olivia Newton-John. On a fishing trip to Mexico in June 2005, McDermott disappeared. Although he's never been seen again, the circumstances of his disappearance have led to speculation that McDermott faked his death to avoid substantial debts, including child support payments to his ex-wife, which was not Newton-John. John Darwin apparently drowned while canoeing in the North Sea in 2002. In reality, the Darwins, John and his wife Anne, were looking for a life insurance payout. In 2007, Darwin turned up in a London police station pretending to have amnesia. Unfortunately for him, someone found a photo of the couple in Panama where they were looking to buy properties. The Darwins were sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud and related charges. Anne ended up divorcing John and wrote a book about her experiences called Out of My Depth. Former hedge fund manager Samuel Israel had been convicted of running a Ponzi scheme and was to report to prison on June 9, 2008. Instead, Israel abandoned his car alongside the Bear Mountain Bridge in upstate New York. The words "suicide is painless" written in the dust on the hood. Given the circumstances, the authorities didn't believe for a second that Israel had killed himself. He hadn't. Instead, he was hiding out with his girlfriend in an RV parked off a nearby interstate. He turned himself in after a month. Israel is still very much alive and in prison. While on a visit to Russia in 2008, Stephen Kellaway and his wife tried a risky scheme. She reported him dead and then returned to their home in Britain and presented the Russian death certificate she obtained for her husband. 2 years later, Stephen came forward, admitting his death had been faked in order to duck an investigation into insurance fraud, of course. He had made an insurance claim on his business, which he then used to pay for his wife's breast augmentation surgery. The Daily Mail reports that Kellaway was inspired by John Darwin's fake death. This politician pulled off quite the electoral feat. Lenin Carbadillo was elected mayor of a village in Mexico in 2013, 3 years after he had, quote, died due to complications from diabetes. When his election news spread, police began investigating and determined he'd faked the death to escape rape accusations dating back to 2004. In 2018, Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko dramatically faked his own death with the help of Ukraine's security services. A contract had been taken out on Babchenko's life, so the security forces planned an assassination in his apartment with a fake assailant and loads of pig blood. At the morgue, Babchenko cleaned up and watched the news of his death on television. Once the threat was eliminated, Babchenko revealed the truth. Quote, "We are happy that Arkady is alive and his attempted murder was prevented," end quote, a media watchdog group told The Guardian. Nevertheless, everybody now feels manipulated. From WatchMojo.com on YouTube, I learned about TikTok star David Barton, also known as Ragnar LeFew, who faked his death. And while an elaborate celebration of life was being held for him, David crashed the memorial, landing in the midst of mourners in a helicopter with a camera crew. The 45-year-old father said the stunt was to teach his family to live in the moment and appreciate life. Oh my God, yeah, right. How about when a person is subject to a death hoax? You may remember a few of these examples. Sean Connery. Yeah, the actor Sean Connery appeared on David Letterman in 1993 to dismiss rumors of his death. Tom Cruise famously laughed off reports of his demise in a 2010 incident, according to Spyscape. Acclaimed actor Gene Hackman reportedly heard about his death from an article that described him as the greatest living American actor gone. It was quickly rewritten to swap the word gone with retired, but not before Twitter fired off condolences and a Facebook page sprang up, R.I.P. Gene Hackman, asking for likes. In 2015, a fake news site spread a false report that Beyoncé was in a fatal car accident, which she debunked. With mega celebrity comes mega death, but it seems George Clooney, the American star, did not nosedive in a private plane in Colorado or plunge to his death from a New Zealand cliff. That didn't stop George Clooney dies stories from going viral. The actor referred questions about his demise to Mark Twain. The action star Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's supposed death from a fall while filming in New Zealand was a hoax. The news exploded, so Johnson trolled his trolls, writing on social media, "I would love to meet the person who is starting rumors of my death to show them how a dead foot feels up there." Yeah, you guess where he wanted to put his foot. The Jason Bourne actor Matt Damon was amazed anyone took the news of his death seriously when a 2009 story appeared with text that sounded like the lyrics to The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. His family took his passing in stride. "All my wife said was, 'Well, that's weird,'" Damon recalled. "Then she reminded me that the same thing happened to George Clooney a few years ago." Rumors about the death of the Spy Game star Brad Pitt have popped up a few times, but reports of his shooting death in 2016 went viral, prompting Pitt to release a statement saying, "I am alive." The shooting story was a hoax to entice readers to click a link to a site that would steal their data. It was unfortunate timing for Pitt, who was in the midst of a divorce from star Angelina Jolie. Legendary actor Kirk Douglas survived a helicopter crash and a stroke, but was killed off twice by the media. Action News 3 still claims the Catch Me a Spy actor died at age 100. He lived to 103, by the way, and People magazine accidentally published his obituary in 2014 under the headline, "Do Not Pub." At least Douglas died knowing he'd be remembered. The Godfather actor Abe Vigoda died at least 3 times. The rumors started in 1982 when people referred to him as the late Abe Vigoda. The actor responded in Variety magazine by publishing a photo of himself reading People magazine in his coffin. The death stories were so relentless, a producer once called his agent asking for an Abe Vigoda type, and a website popped up to keep track of his status status that's called isabevigodadead.com. As one wag put it, I've seen Abe in person. He only looks dead. This next story wasn't a hoax. There was nothing intentional about it, just a mix-up after a family politely refused to identify their dead loved one. Here's the story from Tacoma News Tribune. A family believed their loved one was dead when they received his death certificate and an urn full of ashes, Oregon officials and news outlets reported. Then months later, his cousin received a phone call saying he was still alive, KGW reported. I just lost it. It is so hard to believe how something like this could even happen. It just makes no sense to me, Tyler Chase's cousin, Latasha Rosales, told KGW. Chase, 22 of Portland, was declared dead from a drug overdose September 11th by Multnomah County Medical Examiner's Office. The department confirmed that with McClatchy News. However, Chase is still alive. He was in a recovery program for drug abuse and was trying to get his food benefits when he learned from the Oregon Department of Human Services that he had been legally declared dead, Chase told KPTV. Chase's wallet, including his temporary driver's license, had been found on a man who actually died, the agency said in a statement. An investigator contacted Chase's family, who declined looking at the body before it was cremated, officials said. In the end, the body had been wrongly identified. Apparently, misidentifying bodies is extremely rare. The office learned they made a mistake with the identification on December 18th and contacted his family the following day, officials told McClatchy News. Misidentification is extremely rare but has been reported in a small number of cases nationwide, the office said in a statement. The county medical examiner now has plans to make sure these errors don't happen again by first launching a comprehensive review to identify any gaps in current practices. Additionally, anyone found with a temporary state-issued ID will have their fingerprints submitted before being identified, officials said. The true identity of the dead man has been confirmed by the office and his family was immediately contacted, officials said. I remember sharing a quick overview in season 1 about what was a fad prevalent in parts of the US and Europe during the late 18th and early 19th centuries called the safety coffin or grave bell. It was real, but not commonplace. A bell on a tombstone had a string on it that connected to the buried person's hand or foot. If the interred person was accidentally buried alive, they could ring the bell and an alert cemetery watchman could help dig them up. AI added this interesting tidbit. While the exact origin of the phrase "saved by the bell" is debated, with boxing being thought the source, the concept of grave bells reflects a genuine fear of premature burial during that era. Was being buried alive such a common thing? That's why the safety coffin or grave bell was invented? Well, at that time, the medicine was still an iffy sort of science. People were declared dead that weren't, and I imagine a single story about a person being buried alive would have made every newspaper's front page and would leave a lasting impression on the culture. But being buried alive was in no way common. Then there's Lazarus syndrome. That's the name for being mistakenly pronounced dead but still alive, a name taken from the Bible story about Jesus raising Lazarus of Bethany from the dead 4 days after his death and burial. Jack G. Bray coined Lazarus phenomenon in 1993 to describe this medical phenomenon where a person appears to be dead but spontaneously regains circulation and signs of life after CPR has stopped. Lazarus syndrome is rare. The first recorded case was in 1983, with less than 100 cases happening after that. While a specific cause is still unknown, there are a few solid theories to consider, which include pressure buildup in the chest caused by CPR that impedes blood flow. When that resuscitation process is stopped, the pressure may release and allow the heart to start again spontaneously. Then there's the delayed effect of medications like adrenaline, which are given during CPR. The medication might not circulate well until the chest pressure is relieved. Once circulation is restored, the drug can do its job and jolt the systems back to life. There are other conditions too that can cause Lazarus syndrome, like very low body temperatures called hypothermia or high potassium levels called hyperkalemia, which can both slow body functions to the point that vital signs become undetectable, only for the person to revive later on. Okay, I couldn't help myself. I had to do some digging on the internet and find a couple examples. An 88-year-old Czech woman was put in a coffin in 2025 after being declared dead by paramedics and a coroner. She was found alive by morticians right before her burial. Here are some details from the New York Post. The husband told the emergency dispatcher that she didn't move, she didn't breathe, according to the report. When paramedics arrived, they confirmed the woman's death, and the coroners were dispatched to the apartment. The coroner also confirmed the woman's death, and undertakers were called to move the body into the coffin. The husband also told Blesk that the workers transferred her to the coffin, and when they were right here in the apartment in the hallway by the door, they found out she was alive. And then there's the curious case of a West Virginia woman named Velma Thomas. She was declared clinically dead for 17 hours in 2008. Her heart had stopped and doctors detected no brain activity, which is normal with politicians, isn't it? But anyway, I digress. Velma recovered after being taken off life support. Wikipedia had some more details. Velma Thomas was from Nitro, West Virginia. Okay, I feel like things like that are the Matrix having a little fun with us. Nitro, as in nitroglycerin, that's given to keep a person suffering a heart attack from dying. Okay, but back to Wikipedia's additional facts. In May 2008, Thomas went into cardiac arrest at her home. Medics were able to establish a faint pulse after 8 minutes of CPR. Her heart stopped twice after arriving at the hospital, and she was placed on life support. Doctors attempted to lower her body temperature to prevent additional brain injury. She was declared clinically dead for 17 hours after doctors failed to detect brain activity. Her son, Tim Thomas, stated that her skin had already started hardening. Her hands and toes were curling up. They were already drawn. She was taken off life support and funeral arrangements were in progress. However, 10 minutes after being taken off life support, she was revived and recovered. Okay, I found an instance where a coroner pronounced the same man dead twice in 2 weeks. It's not a joke. Here are the details from CNN. Walter Williams, a Mississippi man who returned to life after being pronounced dead about 2 weeks ago, died Thursday. He was 78. They came and got him again around 4:15 a.m., Williams' nephew Ed Hester told CNN affiliate WAPT. I think he's gone this time. CNN learned about the death from Holmes County, Mississippi coroner Dexter Howard. He was the same man who first declared Williams dead on February 26th. There was no pulse. He was lifeless, the coroner said then. He completed his paperwork, placed Williams in a body bag, and transported him to a funeral home. There, something strange happened. The body bag moved. Coroner on Williams' revival 2 weeks ago said, I was in shock. We got him into the embalming room and we noticed his legs beginning to move, like kicking, Howard said last month. He also began to do a little breathing. An ambulance was called. Paramedics arrived and hooked Williams up to monitors. Sure enough, he had a heartbeat, so they transported him to the Holmes County Hospital and clinics. Williams was released a few days later. He died this time of natural causes, according to the coroner. "Every case I do is a learning experience," said Howard. When asked what the Williams case taught him, he replied that miracles can happen. CNN affiliate WJTV reported the longtime farmer, who family members called Snowball, died at his home. "It was a 2-week miracle for me, and I enjoyed every minute of it, and my family did too," Hester told WAPT. CNN's Elliot C. McLaughlin and Suzanne Presto contributed to that report. I couldn't resist sharing this next little tidbit. It comes from Everplans, who writes, "The Russian people's love of vodka is legendary, but even this takes it a little far. Way out in the Primorsky Krai region of Russia, just across from Japan on Russia's eastern coast, a local paper recounted the story of a man who seemingly drank himself to death at a party on his national beverage. It was a shock to medical examiners, and him too, when he awoke a few hours later in the morgue. It was equally surprising when he returned to the party and joined his friends who were drinking in his memory." You know things are bizarre when life starts to imitate classic Monty Python films. A 91-year-old woman from Poland was declared dead by a medical examiner and spent 11 hours in cold storage before attendants noticed her bag was moving. They quickly unzipped and released the woman, who told them that she felt normal, she felt fine, and went home to warm herself up with pancakes and soup. Aside from medical errors, people can be thought to be dead for other reasons, including clerical errors. A government agency like Social Security can mistakenly declare a living person dead, causing serious legal and financial problems. In 2011, one audit estimated that hundreds of people per month were mistakenly declared dead. And there's mistakes that go the other way as well. That is, until the headline was debunked. I'm talking about that headline we saw everywhere in February. Elon Musk claimed his minions had found billions of dollars of waste in Social Security and repeatedly spouted numbers that were larger than the U.S. population of people over 100 years old getting checks still. Well, sorry to my Elon Musk fans out there. He was wrong. And if he knew better and was still saying it, he was being deceptive. Here's the real scoop from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. Alicia H. Manel writes, "The claims of widespread fraud don't hold water." Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan Experience reiterated the claim that the Social Security numbers of 20 million dead people are being used to steal $100 billion in benefits each year. He keeps repeating this so-called example of fraud, waste, and abuse that he purportedly found at the Social Security Administration. His search of the agency's database had turned up millions of people ages 100 and older. His apparent reasoning is that most of these people are certainly dead, and therefore a lot of fraud was occurring by paying benefits to dead people. To add weight to his story, Musk shared his numbers on Twitter. Indeed, his minions found about 20 million individuals with ages over 100, all of whom presumably were dead and receiving benefits. Tuesday night, President Trump repeated these unproven claims in his address to Congress. The Social Security database includes all individuals who ever paid into the system or received benefits. It makes sense to have a complete record of the program's historical activity. The Musk team asked the machine to scan the database and identify all those who did not have the death date associated with their record, and that query netted the numbers that Musk shared. Two issues, she says, are important here. First, it's not surprising that the Musk numbers exceed the U.S. population. Indeed, more than a decade ago, a 2015 audit report from the agency's Inspector General identified the lack of death data as a problem that should be addressed. However, given the manpower required to fix the historical record and Social Security's limited budget, the agency decided to focus on improving the system for current and future workers rather than completing historical documentation. Hence, while it would be nice if each record had a date of death, many do not. Second, just because records of very old people exist without a death date, that does not mean that these dead people are receiving checks. Two pieces of evidence support that contention. The most important is that the number of checks going out for retirement and disability benefits are just what one would expect. For example, the population of those age 65 plus is 59 million, and the number of checks going out to retired workers, their spouses, and or their widowers is 56 million. If checks were also going out to 21 million old dead people, the total number of payments would far exceed the population of the 65-plussers. On a more micro level, the 2015 Inspector General's report noted that while the examiners had found millions of people in the system who were likely dead, they identified only 13 checks going to beneficiaries who were likely 112 plus years old. And in fact, a handful of people do live to that age, they write. Of course, any organization that pays out $1.4 trillion each year to retired and disabled individuals and their families will inevitably make mistakes. The Social Security Advisory Board, a group of outside experts, regularly issues recommendations to improve the accuracy of the system's payments, such as having the Treasury Department collect the data on deaths. It's important, however, to keep in mind the magnitude of Social Security's errors. According to a July 2024 Inspector General's report, between 2015 and 2022, the Social Security Administration's improper payments accounted for less than 1% of total payments. Apparently, that error rate is lower than for any private insurance company. In summary, the Social Security Administration isn't perfect. It makes some payment errors and does not have the date of death on some of its old records. And because of the lack of death dates, I'm not surprised that the Musk team found many records where the beneficiary's age would be 100 plus. But those records provide no indication of waste, fraud, and abuse. In fact, the people who you'd think should be receiving the checks are the ones getting the checks. And the Inspector General could only find 13 checks going to those over 112. If Musk and his minions want to make themselves useful, maybe they could fill in the missing dates of death on that database. Okay, so find links to that incredible article in the show notes. But back to that list. People can be perceived as dead for other reasons. I mentioned clerical errors, but there are also grief hallucinations. A person experiencing intense grief may have hallucinations that lead them to believe they are seeing or hearing a deceased loved one, which is considered a normal part of bereavement, by the way. And there are fake deaths, which I went into earlier. But in that catch basin, I forgot to mention that some people believe rapper Tupac faked his own death in 1996. I read an article, so you don't have to, but here is the gist. Promoters of this theory that Tupac faked his death are Suge Knight, the co-founder of Death Row Records, who was with Tupac during the 1996 shooting, and he's openly fueled the conspiracies. In a 2017 documentary, he remarked, when Pac died, if he really did. Knight also claimed in 2012 that he paid $3 million to have Tupac's body cremated the day after his death, and that the man who handled the cremation was never seen again. Then there's Suge J. Knight. This is Suge Knight's son, and he claimed in 2018 on an Instagram post that Tupac was alive and living in Malaysia, reportedly with photos of a man resembling the rapper. He later reversed his stance, but still claimed new music could be released. Michael Nice, a man who claimed to have been a bodyguard for Tupac, alleged that he helped stage the drive-by shooting and smuggled Tupac to Cuba. He claimed this was done with the assistance of Fidel Castro to allow Tupac to live in hiding with his aunt, Asada Shakur. Rick Boss, the director of the 2020 documentary Tupac, The Great Escape from UMC, claims that Tupac faked his death and was helped by a body double to escape by helicopter to Navajo land in New Mexico. Boss says he learned this from Tupac's family. Fans and online communities fuel the rumors too. Social media users and members of online communities such as Reddit frequently share conspiracy theories and evidence, including alleged sightings, symbolic references in Tupac's music, and analysis of his posthumous album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory. I found some more of this evidence cited by his most ardent believers. He was cremated fast and there was no public funeral. A public funeral was never held, and Tupac's body was cremated shortly after his death, which some point to as suspicious. The Machiavelli connection. Conspiracy theorists note that Tupac's final album, released under an alias, Machiavelli, was inspired by Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote about faking one's death to escape enemies. Some fans point to lyrics in his later songs that referenced his own death or resurrection as a symbolic message. Rumored sightings. In the decades since his death, numerous reported sightings of Tupac have occurred in various locations, most notably in Cuba. Despite the enduring rumors, official reports from authorities and Tupac's family and an autopsy confirmed that he died from his gunshot wounds on September 13, 1996. The decades-long investigation into his murder has also recently led to an arrest, with Dwayne Keefe D. Davis being charged on September 2023 with the rapper's murder. In rare cases, individuals can be plagued by delusions that they themselves are dead. Named Cotard syndrome, also called walking corpse syndrome, this is a rare psychiatric condition in which a person holds the delusion that they themselves are dead. They do not exist or are missing body parts. They may also believe they are immortal. This next story isn't about death exactly, but it's death adjacent. A long, long nap. Remember the story of Rip Van Winkle? Well, Florida boasts having the second Rip Van Winkle. It's a puzzling tale that comes from Mark Muncy and Carrie Schultz's book titled Freaky Florida. Find links to their book in the show notes. Muncy writes, just shy of 40 million years ago, the sea levels of the world were much higher than they are today. Most of what is now the southeastern U.S. coastal areas were submerged. Coral, shells, and sediment accumulated on the seabed. When the sea levels receded, these sediments hardened into limestone bedrock. This stratum is the foundation of much of the Florida peninsula. About 1 million years ago, acidic groundwater began to dissolve some of the limestone basin to form crevices that would allow rainwater to refill the state's precious aquifer, which lies just below the limestone. This aquifer provides most of Florida's drinking water supply. Sinkholes are the most common landform caused by this erosion. Karst is the generic term used to describe land caused by this erosional process. Many other types of terrain can be created from this process, including disappearing streams, springs, underground drainage systems, and caves. With this geology in mind, Dr. J.C. Patterson of Malone, Florida, was on holiday in Virginia in the early 1930s. He visited the Luray Caverns. He immediately realized the potential of a cavern-focused state park in his home state of Florida. He returned to the area and purchased nearly 500 acres in North Florida that had been known to house small caves and an amazing natural bridge over Chipola River. The early European explorers learned from the Native Americans of the natural bridge of the Chipola River. Most were far more excited about this easy path across the river than they were about the small caves nearby. The Chicano Indians used a trail along this bridge for many years prior. The Spanish military famously crossed this bridge in 1676 to raid a nearby fortified Chisca Indian village. One report from the journal of a 1693 Spanish exploratory expedition remarked that the river must have been very high at the time of the crossing, as the bridge was muddy and much more difficult to cross than had ever been reported. This implied that the bridge was used often by early Spanish explorers of the North American continent. Since little is discussed in early documentation of the European exploration of Florida about this area, the existence of the nearby caves was obviously unknown. However, some people did know about it. The few reports there were said they were small and of little consequence to most travelers. In truth, archaeological discoveries of pottery shards and mammoth footprints in several caves predate all their writings by a great many years. The caves in the area were more important than these early explorers realized. One cave that is now off limits to tourists is called Indian Cave. It had been used by ancient peoples as a shelter from the storms of the area. It was also possibly used for cold storage to keep food from spoiling in the humid Florida summers. Archaeologists have found numerous prehistoric items near the mouths of all the caves in the area. They don't believe the early inhabitants lived in the caves, but they did hold some significance in their lives. More early history of the caverns included an account of a Spanish missionary named Friar Barreda delivering a Christian sermon to a local tribe surrounded by a beautiful underground cavern of wondrous beauty. During the construction of the modern-day Visitors Center parking lot, a village site was found that corroborated that story. The Indian Cave figured in many of the early European military engagements through the 19th century. In 1818, during what is now known as the First Seminole War, Andrew Jackson's army used the natural bridge to drive the Native Americans out of the area. There are legends that some Indians hid in the cave to avoid clashing with these forces of invaders. During the Civil War, members of both the Union and Confederacy sought out the caves as a potential source of niter for gunpowder. As these caves were very damp, they were quickly deemed useless for this purpose. During the antebellum years, the caves became a popular place to spend an afternoon for citizens of the nearby city of Mariana. One legend from this era is too remarkable not to mention here. A group of local teens was out having a picnic near that natural bridge. Afterwards, the teens explored the underground caves in the dark by feeling their way around without the help of torches. It was a fun way to pass the time and was also a chance to steal some private time with their partners away from prying eyes. On one such visit, a man apparently became fascinated by the wall's composition and began to tap on the walls of Indian Cave. One sounded hollow, giving off a slight echo behind it, so he tapped harder. He and his party were shocked when the wall gave way and revealed a previously undiscovered room of caverns. Once the dust cleared and their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they spotted an old man lying on the floor of the newly opened area. Fearing that they had opened some burial chamber or tomb, most backed away. The man bolted upright, though. He seemed as genuinely shocked to see them as they were to have found him. The tale says that he spoke with a strange accent with a strong Spanish influence. He wore animal skins, a long beard, and a cap similar to a coonskin cap old settlers used to wear. Every one of the witnesses remembered that he had a very large Bowie knife, which he brandished to keep them from approaching too closely. The crowd of picnicking young people soon started to understand his way of speaking. The old man was asking them what year it was. When they told him, he was said to have yelled out, "I've been asleep 100 years." Then he ran out the door of the cave, never to be seen again. Now known as the Second Rip Van Winkle, it was this legend and other historical anecdotes of the caves that inspired Dr. J.C. Patterson to buy all that land and dream up opening a park of caves in Florida. Today, you can visit the park and see extraordinary underground formations of stalagmites and stalactites. Underground pools of still water and breathtaking vistas surround you as park rangers host guided tours full of the natural and cultural history of the land. Here, you're inches away from some of the most breathtaking underground scenery in the U.S. There are more than 30 other caves, including Indian Cave, which I mentioned, that are off limits to the public. If you visit, be sure to keep an eye out for any sleepy coonskin-wearing fellows with a long knife. There's a Wikipedia page that keeps track of the times that World News publishes obituaries accidentally, or that social media reports a celebrity death before the person is actually dead and gone. It has hundreds of accounts. I've added a link to that page in the show notes if you want to test your memory or win big at your neighborhood pub's upcoming trivia night. Skim through the list and you're going to find something probably that I found. Many of these misreported deaths have become part of that Mandela effect story. You know, that CERN or some other secret activity glitches our matrix-like reality, and we get a story we remember clear as day, say that Nelson Mandela died in prison, and a new truth that he survived. By the way, the hill of the Mandela effect I am willing to die on is there was a cornucopia on the Fruit of the Loom logo years ago. I specifically remember folding underwear and seeing that label over and over. Back to this timeline, though. I've one last darkish story to share before we wrap. A tale as old as time itself. It's about a man that couldn't get over losing a woman. Back in a second.
Ooh, new Octoberpod promos. Let's hear what we've got. Octoberpod AM. Retro horror for bold individualists. Listen bi-weekly wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe to Octoberpod Home Video for true, true-ish, and classic tales of horror and the paranormal. New videos each month, only on YouTube. For retro horror of impeccable taste, listen to Octoberpod AM, wherever you get podcasts. You're listening to the smooth sounds of retro horror on Octoberpod AM with your host Edward October, the best horror narrator, wherever you get podcasts. Stay spooky, mes amis. Wow, that was weird. Tape must have gotten possessed. I hate when that happens. OctoberPodVHS.com.
Welcome back. American Hauntings, Inc. writes, Strange Love, the morbid obsession of Carl Van Kossel. Key West has always been home to some of America's great eccentrics. It's a place that far removed from the mainland of America, serves as sort of the last outpost for writers, dreamers, musicians, and weirdos. I consider it one of the greatest places on earth, if that tells you anything. But in 1940, news spread around the island that something very strange was taking place in Dr. von Kossel's local lab. And when details were revealed about what it was, we finally discovered just what was too much, even for Key West folks to handle. July 31st, 1909 marks the birth date of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, the daughter of a Key West cigar maker named Francisco Pancho Hoyos and his wife Aurora. Maria Elena had a bit of a tragic life. She had a sister who died from tuberculosis and a brother-in-law who was electrocuted on a construction site. Soon after she was married, she miscarried a child and her husband abandoned her, moving alone to Miami. To make matters worse, Maria Elena also contracted tuberculosis, a fatal disease often at that time. She sought treatment at the U.S. Marine Hospital in Key West, and that's when her story takes a very strange turn. While at the hospital, she met a German-born radiology tech named Karl Tanzler, or as he liked to refer to himself, Karl von Kossel. Tanzler actually had many names. He was born Karl Tanzler, or George Karl Tanzler, on February 8, 1877 in Dresden, Germany. Little is known about his true background because his invented one was so confusing and it changed often. He grew up in Germany but claimed to have traveled to India and Australia, where he did electrical work, bought boats, purchased a South Seas island, and began building a trans-ocean flying plane around the time of World War I. When the war broke out, he alleged that he was jailed by British authorities for safekeeping and was released at war's end. We do know that he emigrated to the U.S. in 1926 by way of Cuba. From Cuba, he settled in Zephyr Hills, Florida, which is a town about a half hour from Tampa, where his sister lived. In 1927, he took a job at the U.S. Marine Hospital using the name Karl von Kossel. It was at the hospital that he met Elena Hoyos, and he immediately fell in love with her. He later claimed that as a child, he was visited by visions of a dead ancestor, Countess Anna Constantia von Kossel, who revealed to him the face of his true love. She was an exotic, dark-haired woman. He was convinced the vision had been Elena. Tanzler, with his self-professed medical knowledge, attempted to treat and cure her with a variety of medicines, as well as X-ray and electrical equipment that were brought to Maria's home. He showered her with gifts of jewelry and clothing and professed his love to her. There's no proof that Elena ever reciprocated his affections. It's likely that she was baffled by the attention being given to her by this strange little German man. Despite Tanzler's best efforts, Elena died from TB at her parents' home in and around October 25th, 1931. Tanzler paid for her funeral, and with the permission of her family, he commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum in the Key West Cemetery, which he visited almost every night. No one knows what finally pushed Tanzler over the edge, but it's believed that he heard Elena calling to him from her grave, asking him to free her from her stone prison. He later stated that Elena's spirit appeared to him when he sat next to her tomb and serenaded her with her favorite song. So one night in April 1933, Tanzler crept into the cemetery and removed Elena's body from the mausoleum, carting it out of the graveyard in a toy wagon. He took her home with him, and that's when things got even stranger. Tanzler wired Elena's bones together with wire and coat hangers and fitted her face with glass eyes. As her skin began to decompose, he replaced it with silk cloth that had been soaked in wax and plaster. When her hair fell out, he fashioned a wig from her hair that had been given to him by Elena's mother soon after her funeral in 1931. Okay, is there any normal way to ask the poor dying person's mother for the hair of the daughter they just lost? I can't even fathom a normal way to ask that. He filled her cadaver with rags so that she could keep her original form, and he dressed Elena in her own clothing, stockings, jewelry, and gloves. Tanzler also used copious amounts of perfume, disinfectants, and preserving agents to mask the odor and slow the decomposition of the body. He had to do so because he kept Elena's body in his bed. In October 1940, Elena's sister Florinda heard rumors of Tanzler sleeping with the disinterred body of her sister and confronted Tanzler at his home where Elena's body was discovered. Tanzler was arrested and detained for desecrating Elena's tomb. Stealing her corpse was not illegal at the time. Tanzler was examined by psychiatrists, but they found him to be mentally competent to stand trial. After a preliminary hearing, though, the charges had to be dismissed. The statute of limitations for the crime had expired. The case drew the attention of South Florida newspapers, and it created a sensation among the public, both regionally and across the U.S. Believe it or not, the public mood toward Tanzler was generally sympathetic. Many viewed the eccentric German as romantic. There was no conclusive evidence at the time that Carl had sexual relations with Elena's corpse, but later examinations suggested that it was possible. During the frenzy over the story, Elena's body was examined by pathologists and then put on public display at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home in Key West, where it was seen by nearly 7,000 people. Elena's corpse was eventually returned to the Key West Cemetery and was reburied in an unmarked grave in a secret location to prevent any further tampering. In the aftermath of the discovery, Tanzler left Key West, but he didn't do so in shame. He returned to Zephyrhills, Florida, and wrote an autobiography that appeared in the pulp magazine Fantastic Adventures in the year 1947. He became a U.S. citizen in Tampa in 1950. He never got over his obsession with Elena Hoyos. Still longing for his lost love, he created a death mask of her as the basis for a life-size dummy, which he kept in his bed until his death on July 3, 1952. Some accounts of Tanzler's death claim his body was actually found in the arms of the dummy, but this is merely wishful thinking by those of morbid sensibilities. According to his obit, he died on the floor of his home. It was noted, though, that overlooking his corpse was a waxen image wrapped in silken cloth and a robe. It seems that his replacement, Elena, was with him to the very end. Thanks for listening to Curious Cat. Until next week, stay curious. I love you. Oh, one last little plug for myself that I never do on here. Check out the show notes for a link to my Substack. I have been writing on there before it was even trendy, and I have a small group of subscribers, which I'm so grateful for, but I'll be adding more material there in the future. See you next week.